So, the first thing I do is I set up my wet palette. Having a wet palette can help keep your paint wet when you're not painting. You put a lid on top of the Tupperware and it stays cold, it stays wet for a while. Now you want to make sure you don't leave it for too long or it might mold and then you have to clean it out, which I had to do. I left it for too long. So I'm going to make this into a wet palette, which basically just means the paint is sitting on water, essentially. So the first thing you want to do is grab Tupperware. Any sort of Tupperware that's preferably, wide and relatively flat. You don't need a really tall one, otherwise you'll be reaching your hand down into it in order to get paint. So you want a nice short, wide one. I believe this one's like for sandwiches or something. So, get Tupperware. Next, you're going to need paper towel. This is a piece of paper towel that I have soaked in water, and then I wrung it out so it doesn't drip. It's wet, it's very damp, but it's not soaking. So you lay that in the bottom of your Tupperware. That gives you the water. Now, you don't want to put paint directly on the paper towel because it'll just soak into the paper towel and then you can't use the paint. So what you do is you get out a piece of parchment paper, cookie sheet paper, whatever you want to call it. It's waxy, prevents water from really soaking into it. If it does get wet, like when you place it on here, you want it to get a little wet, but this won't soak. So I take this and I cut a little square so that it would fit into my Tupperware. And you want to put this right on top of a paper towel. Now, I've cut this a little small. Preferably, I'd want it to touch all of the sides so that paint wouldn't sneak over the edge. But this will do just fine. Now, I may have to add a little bit of water to the paper towel down here. So I'm going to do that a little bit. Just grab a little water. Kind of just pat it in there. Because you want the parchment paper to get a little wet. There we go. Just get water all over the paper towel here. There we go. Okay. That's probably good enough. Put that right in there, and you see some of the water is starting to seep into the parchment paper. That's what you want, but you don't want too much. You don't want it to be soaking wet. You just want it damp. You want everything to be damp. And in this case, since my parchment paper is a little too small, I'm going to leave the corners or leave the edges so that paint doesn't just slide off the edge. So, that is how I make my wet palette. Now, in order to I'll get to how to use this properly later. This is just how you make it. So, whenever you're done painting, or you just want your wet palette to stay wet, you put the lid on it. Now it's almost airtight. It'll stay damp, but you want to make sure you don't leave it for too long, otherwise you might get mold. So, that is usually step one in preparing for painting. Step two is actually preparing the model. Let me move that aside and grab our model here. So this is a Warhammer 40k Ork. I don't remember the name specifically. I actually don't play 40K. However, my roommate does, and he's asked me to paint a couple of his models for him, so that's what I'm going to be doing here. This originally came in a wire frame of pieces that he, snapped off the frame and super glued them together. So you can see a couple of pieces where he had to sand it down after he glued it, and such as right there, and you can see some of the glue welds here, which those will do just fine. We don't need to mess with them at all. However, if you have any serious bumps, you might want to sand them down a bit so it doesn't look really odd. But for our case, little bumps, little bits of sanding, just gives it some battle wear. You don't want a war machine to look pristine, because then it looks like it's never been used. You want a war machine to look like it's really seen some battle. So we're going to leave this just like it is, except for one thing. Before we can paint this at all, we need to put on a base coat, which is why I have these. These are just gloves, well, plastic gloves, rubber gloves. I'm going to take these along with a can of black paint. It's basically just spray paint, but it's made by Citadel, who makes most of the paint for these models. Here's an example. But it's spray paint. It's black spray paint. You want to put on a base coat. Otherwise, when you go to paint it with a brush, none of the paint will stick. It'll just slide, and then you have a big problem. So what you gotta do is you gotta give it some texture. And so I'm gonna put on these gloves. I'm gonna take you outside, and I'm gonna show you how I spray paint. Hopefully, it's not too windy out today. It's a little hot, but that should be alright as long as I bring the model inside to dry. So, I'm going to go paint this, bring you with me, and we'll get going. My black spray paint here. It's Citadel Chaos Black model paint. It's just a spray bottle, spray can, just like any other spray paint. I mean, it's got the Citadel logo on it, and it's a mostly black can with some yellow highlights. If you go to the model store, you should be able to find it there. Or if you look online, you might be able to find a bottle as well. But I'm not actually sure you can order these online, so don't listen to me on that. I'm going to go ahead and head outside, and I'll see you there. And so here we are outside. This is the can of spray paint I'll be using. Toss that away for a second. And go ahead and just pick up the model. Take your can about 6 to 8 inches away and just start spraying. Now here, I'm just trying to give it a very light coat. It looks shiny, but then it'll become matte black. And you don't want it to be very thick, because otherwise you lose all of the little details. Because it's amazing the level of detail these models get to be. You don't want to lose those. So I've pretty much sprayed all of the model by now. I'm just trying to make sure I get all the in-between pieces. Gotta give it a thorough look around. Now, this paint will dry in about 15 minutes at room temperature. So, after I've finished, I just bring it inside and set it on a counter for 15 minutes, and then I can get to painting. It's good to go. And here we are inside. I've let it dry, and now I'm just trying to figure out what colors I want to use. I went ahead and grabbed one of my old models that I already painted, because it's going to be the same color scheme, and went through, and I usually start with red, or at least the main color that wants to be seen, which in this case is red. So, get out my wet palette, put some paint on it, and then I spread out the paint on the brush. I don't want a whole lot of paint on the brush, because otherwise you get big globs of paint. So I go ahead and start just on the biggest pieces and work my way down to smaller pieces. So I'm starting with the shoulders, with the top of the head, around the sides of the metal. And with this paint, you don't want a lot of it on there. You want just enough to hide the base coat. And unfortunately, I couldn't get this at a better angle, and a couple of times I actually go off frame, so you have to excuse me, but promise I'll get better. When you're painting a model, you want to be accurate, but it's not the end of the world if you miss. Throughout this video, you'll see me, paint on pieces that I probably didn't intend to, but that's just what you have to work with. Just little happy accidents that can be corrected or might even make your model look better. So here I'm just trying to figure out what to paint next. There we go, some of the exhaust ports. There we are. More of the exhaust. Now, as you'll see, the paint, when initially put on, is pretty shiny, but it gets to be like a matte color. It's not shiny. There, I'm just painting what I can only assess to be a fuel barrel, just full of oil or gas that the mech runs on. So you gotta paint oil drums red, explosive barrels. Next, some of the leg. And that little sneeze there. Bless you. Now I've obviously sped this video up at about 4 times the speed, but this process for this figure took me about 3 hours, maybe 4. That's with breaks, of course. I took breaks every now and then and checked up on the camera, which actually ran out of space a couple times. So there is actually some missing footage, but it's nothing serious. Now, for orcs, they don't need to be painted red. Of course, their skin is green because they're orcs, but it's just that this clan, if you will, of orcs likes the color red. So I like to make a lot of their armor and parts of their weapons red, but I don't want to overdo it. Especially since this is a big metal, walking mech. There's going to be a lot of parts that's just made of metal. And there I just had to get more paint because I was running out on my palette. But I start with, the base coats. And then much later I'll get into doing the details. There are actually parts of this model that I could not paint without messing up other parts of it, so such as under these shoulder pads here, I couldn't reach under them without making a big mess, so since nobody's going to see it, I didn't paint them. Next, I start on his right arm, which is sort of a dual circular saw sort of weapon. And I'm going to paint some of the armor and the primary parts of it red. The other side, which is like a dual chainsaw type weapon. Once again, just painting the primary pieces, a bit like armor and such. I don't want to paint the entire arm red. I want to have some level of variety in its painting. Make it look like it's made out of scrap metal that was just slapped together and then given a rough coat of paint. Because that's kind of how the orcs roll, is they grab whatever material they can and try and make something out of it. And here I'm starting on one of the hooks attached to the circular saw. I plan on putting quite a bit of weathering on this hook, so I give it a very rough coat of paint. I'm not very precise. Some more armor. I like to paint the spikes red. Makes them hurt more when you paint them red. Touching up some of the legs. I try and stick to using and finishing up one color before I move on to the next color, just for my own sanity. Speaking of which, I put on put a little more red on my palette, so I can continue working on his chainsaw, or dual chainsaw. chainsaws, if you will. Here we are. One done. We're nearly done. Excuse me. Look at me being all exact. And now we're moving on to the next chainsaw. The more straight edge one doesn't have a hook. And on that second chainsaw, I only painted a little bit of it because it was only a small bit of armor on it. Here, I think I'm painting more of the jaw line. Yeah, touching on the jaw, then moving on to the hook on the back of his right foot. The claw, and then the other claw. There we are. Another fantastic reason to use black as a base coat is it works great with metal. And there I was just washing off my brush, just because it was getting a little messy. If your brush starts to fray a little bit, then it doesn't hurt to wash it off and try again. Actually, my roommate walked in, so I've cut the audio here. And he came over and take a look at how I was doing. And I showed him a bit what I was doing while I continued to paint. I want to make it look like I wasn't being lazy on him. Putting some more touches on one of his arms. And moving to some of the armor between his legs there. Unfortunately, I got about out of frame here. Hope you can forgive me. I couldn't actually see how I was looking in the camera, using an old phone as a camera, which proved to be difficult or caused some challenges, but made it work. And there I'm just finishing up the red, putting on some final touches. So I'm ready to move on to another color. Cover one of the fuse boxes. And some of the piping. There we go. See what I did there? Here I'm cleaning off the brush. Just water, and then I rub it on the little cloth here, clean it off, make the paintbrush pointy again. And here I'm just trying to look for some inspiration, if you will. Try to figure out what color to use next. Which I pull out a gray to paint some of the metal gray instead of keeping it like black metal. So fix my brush up and get to work with gray. Now here, I actually had a problem with my phone. It ran out of space. So I had to, had to fix it up and had to come back. So we're working with, I believe, still the gray. Look at me being out of frame. There we go. Yeah, I'm still using the gray. I'm trying to cover up some of the metal. So I don't want all of it to be black. I want to have some variations in metal. Like I said, make it look like it's made out of scrap. Cleaned off my brush. And I got out the yellow, I believe. Because I wanted to paint some of the parts yellow to make them look like it's kind of like a construction equipment or something like that. Or in this case, electricity, lightning bolts to let you know, hey, danger, there's electricity. I'm painting a couple of circuit boxes and stuff like that. One of his eyes. He's got, I think, like 4 little lenses that he uses for eyes. And there I'm painting his left arm yellow with a little bit of yellow on some of the things, the bracers for the chainsaws, a hinge. Here we go. Some of his underarm. Clean off the brush. Get a little more paint. There we are, yeah, I painted one of his eyes yellow. One of his middle eyes. And then I paint one of the wires coming off of the circular saw hand yellow. And then I paint one of his, I guess they're engines or radiators or something. Decided to paint that yellow instead of leaving it flat black. This radiator proved pretty interesting because it kind of just looked messy every time I looked at it. I moved on to a different part of the arm. Another hinge or brace. And decided to color the little hatch handle yellow. There we are. Cleaned off the brush. Now that I look at it, it kind of looks like Iron Man. Here I'm actually using a brown to paint some of the leather straps that are holding some of the exhaust together, some of the mufflers. That I'd use some leather color there. Make it really look like it's just kind of slapped together. A little more brown for the other leather strap. Which unfortunately you can't see because I'm out of the frame. There we are, so a bit of it there. Alright. Starting to come together. Then I moved on to white. So I'm actually going to paint his teeth white. Look at that. Because The little neck has little teeth on the mouth, so gotta paint those white. There you go. Good view of it there. Now you'll notice I'm actually using a headlight, and that's because my room doesn't get bright enough, or bright as I'd like, to actually see the model well up close. So I use a headlight, and lets me see everything a lot easier. I'm having to squint because it's a little dark in my room. Next, I actually move on to a bright red, which I'm going to use for some of the highlights, like some wires and his eyeball, his main eye. I put some bright red on it to make it look kind of like it's glowing. Here you go. A bright red eye, look at that. And then one of the smaller eyes is bright red as well. And then I get some of the, I'm not sure if they're hydraulic or electrical wires down there. Yeah, still painting with the red, bright red, trying to figure out what next. Next, I actually break out the bright green to paint some more highlights, some more details, such as one of his eyes, and there you go, his second eye. Paint that bright green. And one of the cables. There you go. And then touch up his eye a bit more. When I'm doing this, I really don't go into it with a solid plan. I kind of just let the model tell me what to paint. As silly as that sounds. Just look at it and just whatever color feels good. Put it there. And here I actually get out, it's sort of a light brown, almost yellow. And I use that for one of the eyes, and then some of the more details. Like one of the little radiators or fuse boxes, then a tube or pipe, not sure which. And then one of the wires near it on his face. And another couple fuse boxes and such. Here we are. Next, I actually get out some of my metals. The metal colors, they're kind of shiny. If anyone is interested, I can actually list all the colors I used in this, but actually here I get out, not a metal, I get out a dark green, because I wanted to paint the ammo boxes under the guns, sort of an army green color, olive, if you will. Maybe the orcs stole these ammo boxes from the humans, the good guys or something. And now they're shooting at him with them. There we go. There we go. And then I paint a smaller little canister that's under the main body. Paint that green. Kind of an army green as well. Clean off the brush. I was just doing a couple touch-ups with some of the colors there. Alright, next I move on to using bronze, a bronze color. I put that on my palette. Clean up my brush before I use it. I start to get some of the metal bits that I like to think are made of bronze. I suppose this bronze could also be used for something like rust or something, but I'm not that skilled with it. I just like to use it for metal bits that I might think are made of bronze or a dark metal. Here we are. I don't use bronze very much. I rarely use it at all. I like it to be very rare because it's very odd, and if you overdo it, then you can kind of change the theme of your model accidentally. Here I actually break out a color called Lead Belcher, which is really just a shiny silver. So I wanted to paint a couple of the bits silver, make them look like they're made out of some shiny metal that wasn't painted. Stainless steel or something. Brushed steel. I also use Lead Belcher for scratches, but I like to use dried paint for that. It sounds a little bit counterintuitive to use dry paint, but that bottle at the bottom of the screen was actually given to me by a friend, and that's because it's basically dried out, but I use it for scratches and stuff, and like weathering and such, and I think it looks great. And it really adds some character. Now you'll see I actually painted his face as a brushed steel, if you will. And actually I mixed white with the yellow to make color for the horns, which I also use for regular teeth, so that it looks a little more natural. Just touching up some of the ammo boxes because I missed a few spots. And actually move on to the dried paint. Put a little on my palette. And this stuff I think is magic, because the model goes from a piece of plastic to this battle weathered, machine that is all scratched up and has been thrown around a bit, maybe. See there, you can see some of the edges are really coming out and shining. Because when you're adding weathering, you want to think, oh well, if it fell over, where would it get scratched? Where would weathering happen if something happened? If it fell over, if it got shot at. And I actually added a little too much weathering to his face, and I went back and fixed that later. But now here, I usually just add this dry Lead Belcher paint to edges. I kind of just have at it. There's no mercy. Because it's a big metal machine, it's going to get scratched up and it's not going to be maintained very well. Especially because it's Ork. Put some good scratches on it. And this is actually what I like to spend a lot of my time on, is making it look like it's, seen battle, like it's been scratched up, it's been beaten up. Because that really gives it character. Having a model is, in pristine condition, like, and hasn't, it just doesn't have any character to it. Kind of just looks like it came right out of the factory and hasn't seen any battle. You wouldn't expect it to do well in a fight. But with something that looks all scratched up, it really gives it life. Gives it a name for itself. And right there, I touched up the face because I messed it up earlier. As you can tell, I've spent quite a good bit of time on scratches, continuing to add more and more paint to my palette as needed. Just painting around the fuel barrel. Put some scratches on the radiators. And it's about right here that I noticed that the mouth area looked a little strange. So I painted the mouth area that light gray color, and then later I realized that it looked a little silly. It looked like it wasn't painted with that black base coat. So later I went back in and gave it a shiny look to it. Of course, gotta scratch up the hooks and claws to make it look like they've been walking around and being scratched up by the rocks and dirt. I'm putting some weathering on the circular saws. Clean up the brush a bit, fix it up. I actually put a little bit of bronze in some of the cracks and such to try and make it look like it had some rust. Try a little new technique with that. There we go. Jaw still moves up and down. Here I actually came in with a black, just straight from the bottle, and colored in some of the spots that I thought should stay regular black, like some of the rubber around some of the wires, and then try and put some soot, if you will, in some of the bullet holes and scratches. Make it look like the paint was burnt right off of the metal as it was hit by the bullet or hit with shrapnel. And I colored in a couple other spots that I thought didn't need any weathering and would be best just matte black, a flat black color. Because obviously, if you scratch rubber, it's not going to look, silvery. It's gonna be black, or whatever the color the rubber is. Clean up the brush again. Here we are, back in frame and back out. Here I actually was painting some of the underarm parts with lead filter, and it's at this point that I'm pretty happy with myself. And actually, I get out my long brush that has long hairs, and I get out something called Nuln Oil, and this adds shadows, essentially. You see me just throwing it everywhere, because what it does is it's very liquidy, basically just water with a little bit of black in it, and you put that all over it. That puts shadows and really makes things have contrast, and puts put some dirt on it, make it look like it's leaking a bit of oil here and there. There we are. Now it looks very wet right now, but that's just because it hasn't dried. When this dries, it will look like it's just dirty and grimy and oily, just like you'd want a big messy mech to look. I use a very large amount of Nuln Oil. Can't really, well, you can overdo it, but Nuln Oil is great. Here is final touch. Terrain. And here I have some very fine rocks with some larger rocks. And I just have some Elmer's glue and a fat little paintbrush. I take the model and I put glue all over the base of the model. Good amount of glue. I want the stuff to stick. And really, what I do is paint the glue onto the base of the model. And the glue will dry clear, so if you get a little on the model, or if a little bit is showing after the rocks have been put on, it's fine. It'll disappear. Unfortunately, I'm out of frame, so you can't exactly see what I'm doing. There, you can see some of it. Pick up some rocks and kind of just sprinkle them on there. There we are. Sprinkle them on. Little sprinkles. That's why I have this paper plate, is because some of the rocks just fall right off. So get the paper plate and get to save some of the rocks and save me time from cleaning up. There we are. Gotta get around the sides of the feet. Got a little bit stuck to my hand there. Pinch it up off of the paper plate. Sprinkle it on. Shake some loose. Usually need a small little layer down at the bottom. We'll add the big rocks in a minute. There we go. And here I actually put some glue directly on one of the bigger rocks and press it onto the base. Take another rock and put that on the back. It's not really important where you put these rocks, just for scenery, just for character. I actually picked up these small and big rocks just from Hobby Lobby. Just go to the model section and you can find scenery like stones and rocks and pebbles. Put another big rock right next to the other one. And then another one. It's a big base this guy's on, so put quite a few rocks to take up some of the empty space. And here I'm actually bringing over some scrubs, some dead bushes I have, which is just made of rubber. Pick this up at Hobby Lobby as well. And I cut out a little corner, and I just pull off some of the shrubs, put a little glue on it, and then slap it right on the base. It's pretty light, so a little bit of glue will go a long way. Here, just grab another bit. There we go. Grab a little more. Here we are. Squish all that together, then put a little glue on it. And I think I'll attach a rock to it as well. Make it look like the bush was trying to grow under a rock. And here I just put it on there. Unfortunately, I'm not good with framing, as you can tell. Just checking it right now to make sure everything's going to stay on, clearing off any loose stones and such. Clean off the edges a bit. And right now, since the glue is tacky, you can adjust things. But you don't want to shake it too hard or you'll shake off all the rocks. Alright, clean off my hands because they're a little covered in glue. And there we are. It's all done. One orc mech. And here we have it, the finished product. In total, this took me maybe 3 to 4 hours with breaks. I think it looks pretty good. And my roommate agrees. But what do you think? If you liked this video and would like to see more like it, this painting, let me know in the comments and I'll be happy to record me painting more. I still have plenty of models. Well, thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.